Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Self Pub Sunday. Today is episode 19, and we're joined by Delaney Andrews, author of Silhouette in the Shadow, which is book one in the Silhouette series. Welcome, Delaney, and thank you guys so much for joining.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be talking with you.
I told Delaney before we went live, I'm about 50% through book one, and I am absolutely loving it. It's just like a nice breather amongst a lot of other heavier fantasy that I'm reading, and it's so much fun.
Oh, thank you so
much. So as a little quick icebreaker, as people kind of trickle in and get settled in, I was wondering if you could tell us about the last great read you've had.
Oh, this is such a good question. And we've talked, you and I just talked about this before we went live too. It's like, oh, this is a year where I haven't gotten to do a ton of reading. I'm sure compared to other people, it's been a lot. Let me think. I'm going to pull up my Goodreads real fast because I saw one and I was like, this will be the one that's inspired me lately. All right. Hold, please. Oh, you know what? I just got from the little free library in my neighborhood. I found a romantic comedy by Christina Lauren called The Unhoneymooners. Mm-hmm. And I've not read anything by her, the two women who write as Christina Lauren, or I've not read a lot of traditional like rom-coms in general. And The Unhoneymooners, I don't have it. I've put it back in the library since I finished it, but it was like this battered copy where the spine was all wrinkled and broken and part of the cover was torn. And I was like, oh, somebody loved on this book and I need a book to read by the pool over Labor Day. So I picked that up and it was just lovely. It was fun and fast paced and had like enough heart to really get you involved, but enough silliness where you knew you were like, this is, you know, just suspend disbelief a little bit to get into the story. And I will say it's one of those where the plot, big climax, without getting too spoilery, seems to revolve around like our heroine being right about someone who is awful and no one believes her. And she is proven right in the most brilliant explosion of a way. And it was just, I just had so much fun reading it. So
I've heard great things about that book. So speaking of good writing, I want to talk a little bit about your writing career before we jump into talking about your book. I know in your Goodreads bio, it says when you were 14, you convinced your parents to buy the entire bibliography of one of your favorite authors. Was that kind of your inspiration to becoming a writer? Did you always want to be a writer? Or was there one moment in your life where you're like, yes, this is what I want to do?
It was around 5th grade, and it is around that author too, which happens to be Tamara Pierce. And she was just my first author. I remember in 5th grade, one day my dad came home from work and said, like, I was listening on the radio and they interviewed this author and they were talking about this book. And it was the year that she released The First Test, which is the first book in her Protector of the Small quartet. And he's like, I heard about this book and it's about like a fantasy medieval type world where like girls are finally allowed to become knights, but no girl has tried it yet. And it's about the first girl to like try it. He's like, I think you'd really like it. And he got it for me. And I was just obsessed, you know, and this was like, I don't know, 2000, 2001 maybe. So I could hop on barnesandnoble.com and see that like, oh, Tamara Pierce has already written so many books. So I started reading her back catalog, but I, didn't have a job and they would give me books. So by the time I turned 14, I'm like, how about we just don't do a party and you just buy me the rest of her books that I don't have? And they were like, all right. So yeah, I think somewhere in there, I learned like, oh, a writer is a job you can have. I didn't think about it I didn't think about it that hard at the time. I just liked reading so much and, going to the library and things like that. And her books were my favorites. So when I realized that you could be a writer, I'm like, oh, that's what I want to do. But I think I was always very like practical, maybe to a fault. Like in late high school, I was like, well, I'll study journalism because you don't go to college to like study being an author. Or in college I did study English. I didn't go for the journalism slant, but I was still like, I need to know something else too for like a 9 to 5 job that pays my health insurance or gets me health insurance in a retirement account. So it was always a dream I had, but then I returned to especially the idea that became Silhouette in the Shadow like every few years. But something clicked in like, I think it was like summer or fall of 2018. I just got this bug that I just needed to start writing again. And I did, and I really enjoyed it. And I just started writing every day, and that's evolved into where we are now.
That's awesome. So you talked about Tamara Pierce being kind of one of your early inspirations. Who are some of your other writing inspirations when you're working on the US series?
Yeah, I love there is a YA author named Erin Bowman who's traditionally published. She wrote her first duology that I read from her is like a series of like westerns, actually called Retribution Rails and Vengeance Road is the first one. And it was a genre I'd not really read before. You don't really see a lot of like westerns, right, out necessarily unless you're specifically like in that section looking for it, right? So, but I saw this on a Barnes and Noble table. She's got a brilliant newsletter and like social presence where she talks about like the business of being a writer, and she's just really vulnerable, and her lessons are really powerful. She offers some classes too digitally on like plotting or graphic design because she does graphic design as well. So I adore her, and it's funny because I didn't realize until recently. I like looked at the blurb on her first book on the very front, and I realized she was blurbed by Tamara Pierce, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. So she's someone else I look up to a lot and learn a lot from via what she shares on the internet.
Awesome. Now I want to talk spoiler-free first about Silhouette in the Shadow. Can you give us kind of your elevator pitch on what Silhouette in the Shadow is all about?
Absolutely. So Silhouette in the Shadow is a superhero book. It's a superhero story akin to many of your Marvel superhero origin stories, right? It's like your Spider-Mans, your Captain Marvels. I've pitched it as like Batman and Robin meets Gilmore Girls as well, of like, there's a cozy small town that's a little bit weird, but then it's got a big city area, and there's superheroes and vigilantes in it. So that's the overall vibe. The basic plot is we follow our hero, Mel, who is kind of living a life that's not so great, right? She's lost her mother and is kind of being taken care of by her father. And that situation is not awesome, and she wants to get out. And she basically gets a lifeline in the form of like a package in the mail, and finding out that she has like a long lost uncle who didn't know she existed, and vice versa. And he's like, well, you can come stay with me in the Crown City where I live. And she decides to like take a chance, especially she's really interested in going to college, just trying to get some mobility in her life to have some agency or control over her life. So she goes to live with him, and while navigating all that ensues, it also turns out like on the side, he's a superhero and he's got superpowers, and they're genetic. So she's got them too. So there's some instances where she learns that and how they come to terms with that.
When Uncle Bane first entered the picture, it brought me back to a book that I used to be obsessed with when I was a kid, and that was The Secret Garden. And I had like dreamed of having a secret rich uncle come and save me.
Mm-hmm. That it brings me a lot of comfort, because that's kind of where the idea was born from. I remember the very first time the very first seed of this story occurred when I was in high school, and I was sick. I was stuck home sick, and I watched Batman Begins. That was just like in our pile of DVDs, and I put it on, and I was like, this is great. And I had a great life, but I would say, unadventurous life, right? You know, like the most adventure I could find in the woods by my house. And I just, reading these stories and watching these movies, I just wanted an adventure. And it was just like, I wish like Batman was like my cool older cousin, my cool uncle, like something. And then we could have these adventures. Especially because I'm the oldest of all of my siblings. So I have like aunts and uncles, and that's great. But I didn't have like a role model who was older than me, who like wasn't a parent or a teacher or something like that. So that gap was missing. So I think Bane sprung forth from that desire. And boy, did he spring! That man is wild.
He is. So you mentioned the Marvel comics and others. We don't have a lot of superhero novels outside of the comic genre, but there are some out there. I was wondering how Silhouette in the Shadow is different than our other superhero novels.
Totally. It's a great question, especially because I think part of what stuck in my brain about writing this story is that while you're right, there are some superhero books and there are some great superhero books. It's not a huge genre, I think partially because there's comic books, right? Like that is kind of the paper medium for a lot of these stories. But of these superhero books I read, none of them were giving me this like traditional origin story that I wanted, that like followed these beats of like discovering your powers, being wary, trying them out for the first time, getting excited, learning that this could be dangerous, things like that. So I've read a lot of books, a lot of superhero books that are kind of follow more X-Men-y in the tone of like lots of different powers, lots of people have powers. Powers are a well-established part of this world, or the world is slightly different, like it's an alternate reality, or a different country, things like that. Where Silhouette in the Shadow is basically supposed to be like present day in a Midwestern city that currently doesn't exist, right, in the United States. So it follows a lot of those traditional beats you'll get out of like a Batman Begins or like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. That first one is like formative for me when it came out. It follows a lot of those beats. And then something else that makes a difference is the powers themselves. So Mel and Bane have kind of a standard, a very common, I would say, superhero type power, which is like super strength, invulnerability, enhanced reflexes, things like that. But they are impacted by their surroundings. So the way it works is that for Mel, when she's warm, like physically, like when she's wearing layers and exposed to heat, she is very strong. But when she's cold, then she's incredibly weak, right? So the strength kind of reverses and she's weaker than the average human when she is cold. And then Bane is vice versa, right? So he is incredibly strong in the cold and incredibly weak in the heat. So it makes for very interesting conflict because they constantly have to be thinking about their surroundings and how their super suits can affect this. So that's what makes it just a little bit different.
I love it. So you talked a little bit about where you got the idea from for the Silhouette in the Shadow. Did the storyline come first or did your characters come first in your head?
The storyline probably came first, especially it's been interesting to write, this book that has been with me since I was really young, right? Which I think a lot of authors do. They have this idea from the very first time they realize they want to be a writer that they flesh out. So the plot definitely came first, especially because I knew there needed to be like a big bad of some kind. What was this fight going to be like? What are some of these images that I really want to happen, or these scenes? So while some of the action has remained the same, when I go back and I read like earlier drafts of the characters, I realize that they're very flat, right? They're not super fleshed out. So that was the most fun to do in editing, is to really discover who these characters are and to like learn how to write like that, and getting help from editors and things like that.
Awesome. Now I want to slide into spoiler chat. So anyone out there that's watching this, if you haven't read Silhouette in the Shadow yet, you don't want to be spoiled, consider this your fair warning. And anyone out there that is watching this, if you have questions for Delaney, feel free to put them in the chat or in the comments as you're watching this. And if you're watching this later, we'll get those questions to her and we'll get you your answers.
Yeah.
So, spoiler chat about Silhouette in the Shadow. I was wondering if you have a favorite character or who is the easiest character for you to write?
Yeah, that's tough. I would imagine a lot of the authors you talk to have a similar answer because, of course, we love them all, like even the mean ones. I do adore Uncle Bane, obviously, but I say obviously because like when I started sending out Silhouette in the Shadow for beta reader feedback, and then even after it was published, like that was the number one comment I got back was like, I love Uncle Bane. I love this guy. Oh my goodness, to the point where I hear so much about him that I'm like a little bit sick of him. But he's fun, and he allows me to write some of just like, I don't know, like if I didn't have any impulse control, like it's very fun to get into his head and try and decide what he would do. But then conversely, Mel is fun as well because she's a little more reserved and she's very different from me. So it's fun to get into that headspace to see what she would do. She might be the easiest because the whole series is written from her point of view. So I don't have to do any head hopping, and I'm only seeing other characters through what she sees. Mm-hmm. And then her voice, I write in her voice. So I've obviously got lots of practice doing that now. But it has become fun to kind of figure out for each character, there's usually like one or two things like in my mind that I think about when I write them or whatever they're doing or their dialogue that kind of guides that interaction. So like, for example, I think of Cheza, who is one of like the support characters. She's a close family friend. She's part of this found family that helps run their vigilante operation. And like, she exists in this weird headspace of like, she loves this found family of hers and she wants to be involved and she wants to be a help. But there's part for that really is like, I didn't ask for this. And I know we're doing the right thing. And I love you guys. I'm not going to abandon you. But like, so like she's tired and she like doesn't want to do this sometimes. So figuring out what those like couple core personality things are makes it kind of easy when I'm focusing on someone to determine like what would they say in this instance, or if I need to have a character act a certain way, which character would it make the most sense to you to complete that action?
I think my favorite character so far is Cheza because she's that character that is so sarcastic and says the things that you wish you could say, but you hold back saying. Mm-hmm. Straight out says them.
Yeah, I love her. She kind of knows what she's doing. Everyone knows what they're doing a little bit, but I like to think that she knows what she's doing the most.
So on the reverse side of things, who is the hardest character to write?
It's interesting now. I'm learning more of that now as I'm diving into working on the third book. And I'm also getting ready to record the first two audiobooks. So I'm going to record them myself, which I'm so excited about. But so in trying to find actual kind of different voices to do for the characters, I'm finding that some of them blend, or how are they different? So Mel's dad is kind of a bad guy in Silhouette in the Shadow. Also, the mayor of Crown City is kind of a bad guy. And then there's some other characters that we don't know that well. And it's hard to write them when maybe I don't know all that much about them yet, right? I haven't had to spend that much time with them besides knowing that they're bad. So it's tough, but it's fun. And there's kind of for book 3, there's kind of a different villain we've not really heard from before. And it's been really fun to dive into them and have to spend all this time thinking about like, why are they like that? And what was their life like, even though so little of that is going to make it into the book. So it's difficult, And it's more time consuming than anything else, but it's very fun.
I think one of my favorite scenes is when Bane takes Mel down to their den and she learns that there is not anything wrong with her. What's been happening to her is her family's secret powers, and she has that full realization. But I was wondering, what were some of your favorite scenes in writing this book?
Oh, I love the parade scene. I just love a spectacle in general. So a lot of the scenes from Silhouette in the Shadow or Born of Experiences I've kind of had, like, honestly, like the first time I saw the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, like on TV, I've not seen it live. The first time I saw it on TV, I was like, this book is going to have a parade in it, obviously, which is very fun to then finagle from the back end of like, why would there be a parade here? And it's become this cool thing that now Crown City is known to be a city that like has weird, quirky festivals and just celebrates everything. And it's very fun like that. I also love there's a scene that takes place at a baseball field that is very fun. So I think I realize the trend now is maybe these big set pieces that I get to write that are kind of the linchpins along the way of the plot. They're so fun. They're so different. And it's, you have a lot more set to play with when you're writing, whereas sometimes it's like in a smaller scene, I've got two characters in a room and they need to have a conversation. And I'm just like, okay, I can't have them sigh anymore. They've already sighed twice this chapter. Like, I don't know. What are they doing with their hands? Does anyone care? I don't know.
Yeah. So on, of course, the reverse side, what were the hardest scenes for you to write?
Some of the stuff between Mel and Bane that I love the most is them learning to trust each other and like become a family, right? The family is a huge theme in this book and this series. And when it gets down to writing something incredibly vulnerable, like at least for me, I knew like the feeling, the actual like physical sensation that I wanted to permeate the chapters. But I'm like, oh, what do they say? And how do they say it in a believable way? And to me, is this hokey? But what are other readers going to think? So the really earnest, emotional stuff is difficult, but so rewarding when it's done well. That's my favorite in like other books, like in romances and things. It's like when the characters that are falling in love can like have a clear conversation about what they mean to each other and what they've overcome or learned or how they're going to change.
Yeah.
It's awesome when it's done well. So I try hard to do it well. I think some people think I have. So
yeah, I would agree. I think it's done well. So what do you hope readers come away with after reading Silhouette in the Shadow?
I think first of on a very surface level, like I want to provide that feeling of it, like joyous rush you get like after watching like a Marvel movie or an action movie or reading like a pirate tale, things like that. So that sense of adventure, but then also like, I don't know, that sense about family and like vulnerability and like kindness is not a bad thing, right? And I think Mel and Bane think a lot about like what they're doing. It's not as simple as we are vigilantes who like stop the bad guys. There is some exploration of like what is bad and what is like I can't just run into the streets and start kicking ass of every person I see who I think is doing wrong. So I like to think I'm starting to poke a little more critically too at the idea of like the superhero genre, which again I hope to unravel a little more as we go into later books. But I got a review once that called my style like lighthearted female badassery and we're like heartwarming female badassery, which I'm like, cool, if that's my brand, I will take it.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to talk about future writing projects. You mentioned that you're working on book 3 right now for this series. How long do you imagine this series to get?
I believe The Silhouette series will be 5. I've got it very loosely outlined, and that should work. I think I've got enough plot and problems and issues for Mel to face to last that long, but not any longer. So I think that'll be 5. The second book, Silhouette and the Monster, just came out this past June. So that's super exciting. I haven't had the chance to market it as much because when I wrote Silhouette in the Shadow, I'm like, I will take as much time as I need to get this book out into the world. And I did do that. And then with Silhouette and the Monster, I'm like, I'm going to write this as fast as I can while it's still good. And so by the time the end of June rolled around and it came out, I was like exhausted. So it's out there. And I love it dearly. And I think a lot of people do too. But so I'm hard at work on book 3. I've actually, along this process, since I first published the first book, I've developed a love for romance novels, which I had like never read. I don't know how I had missed that. I'd hit not, like I've read sci-fi, I've read fantasy, like I've got lots of nonfiction, I've got jokey books, like I've got a lot of the big hitters on my bookshelf, but never much romance. So I've decided that in turn, while I'm doing the Silhouette series, and then superhero books will kind of always be my main focus. On the offhand, I'm going to be writing romance novels. So I've got a couple of those drafted and a potential series coming together. Actually framed in one of my interests of like, I'm really into motorsport, like IndyCar, Formula One racing. You follow me on Twitter, you've seen the memes. So it's kind of entrenched in that world. And like the format of a romance novel is so different from like a sprawling, like epic, like 5-book series. So the switching back and forth has been great. While I've been working on a race car book, like a really big solution to a problem for book 3 of Silhouette came to me. So we're going to be kind of rolling out those series at the same time. Silhouette's always going to be the priority. I think now it'll be a little bit staggered of like a romance book and then a superhero book, then a romance book, then a superhero book. But we'll see. It takes a long time to write books, and I am impatient.
Well, Delaney, that's all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about today?
I don't think so. I'm really heartened by the fact that you were interested in my book and have taken a chance on it and really enjoyed it. When I see that so much of what you cover, it's very traditional, like high fantasy, which I also adore and gobble up as much as I can. So it's nice to know that this can hold interest for someone in that world. So I hope maybe other people will take a chance on it like you did and be like, hey, this is a great breather between epic fantasies, right? Like it's like 300 pages each book, right? So you can get fast and enjoy it. Yeah. And I think some of the themes are universal too. I think there's definitely, especially with how much Tamara Pierce I read, it's funny to see like training montages.
Right. I love training montages. I love seeing a person learn how to do whatever they're called to be doing.
Yes.
Like one of my biggest pet peeves in like action movies or superhero movies is when a character just knows how to do everything instantly. And I'm like, but how do they know how to do it? Like I loved watching Mulan growing up as a kid. Because you saw Mulan learn how to become a warrior and she made the mistakes that you would make when you're doing that. But then I watched the live action film and she instantly knew how to do everything. She was like crouching tiger hidden. The whole point of Mulan was that she had to learn this and she made these mistakes. So
I 100% agree with you there.
But if you look at my bookshelves, you'll see literally every single genre on there.
I love that.
I read everything. A lot of what I cover on the channel is high fantasy. But I read everything. I just finished a novella that was a horror novella for the speculative fiction. What is it called? Speculative Fiction Indie Novella Championship series. I'm a judge for that, and I just finished my first novella, Shattered Spirits, and by Cal Black. And I went into it having no idea what it was about. I knew like her other books had really great receptions, and they look super fun, and they're on my never-ending TBR list.
Yep.
So I went into this thinking, like, I know I'll like the writing because other people that I have similar reading tastes absolutely loved her other books. And then immediately as I got in, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horror. This is super creepy, but so good. That's my daytime books.
Yeah, I'm a big old scaredy cat. So horror is one of the few genres I've not read, but we'll see. I have a close indie pub friend who does a lot of horror books, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to read one eventually because I adore her and I know I will like her writing. But will I sleep? Is it worth the trade-off? Probably.
Read it during the day.
Yes.
Like I used to love watching like the Criminal Minds shows, but I could only watch them in the middle of the day with all of the lights on.
Yes, and hopefully like someone else at home, right? Like, ugh.
Well, speaking of horror, my next guest in October is going to be Daniel Barnett, and we're going to be talking about his Nightmareland Chronicles, and I'm definitely going to have to read those during the day because they are super, super scary and creepy, but I can't wait because I've wanted to read them so much. So
yeah,
Delaney,
I'll watch you guys talk about them first to gauge if I can handle reading them.
one of my best friends, Leslie from the Nerdy Narrative, she's big into horror books, and so whenever I'm getting ready to read one, I ask her, I said, okay, is this a daytime read or a nighttime read?
Accurate.
And she's my gauge. If she finds it scary, then it's like morning.
Yeah.
If she's like, then it's like daytime. But if she's like, she's known my taste now and what I consider scary. And so she's able to tell me, like, this one you want, like, she told me, when you read the Nightmareland Chronicles, you want to reserve time during the day, in the middle of the day, when it's perfectly light out. Do not read those.
That's what you need. I love that.
So, well, thank you so much, Delaney, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. I'm honored.
Great. And I can't wait to go and finish up Silhouette in the Shadow and see what other crazy things they get into.
Yes, enjoy.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Like I said, next month in October, we'll have Daniel Barnett on. And if you're watching this back, feel free to add questions or comments in the comment section, and we'll get those over to Delaney. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.